Welcome back to Light Talk, where the paranormal and the supernatural experiences are an everyday part of our lives. If you have an experience you would like to share, email me at lighttalk423@gmail.com. And while you're at it, click on the like, share, and subscribe buttons down below. Well, to let you all remember, please check out my website at www.lighttalkwithdana.com and check out all my upcoming events with card readings and photo reads. And if you have any ideas of doing your own personal readings, please check into it. All right, we're not going to waste any more time. We're going to get going here. I want to welcome very much our guest today, and I'm just going to hand the mic over and we can continue. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dana. Well, for everybody that's listening, thank you for joining us here for the stories that we're going to share. We hope you enjoy them. My name is Artemaeus Treadwell, and I married an intermediary. And we have our own channel over at the Weird Walk Home on YouTube. And we just started a series recently where I essentially diary vlog my paranormal experiences since being within Tilly's orbit the last 10 years or so that we've been together, married for roughly half of that thus far. So it's been, to say the least, a very interesting journey. So there's lots of stories that I could share, but I'll turn it over to Dana so that she can guide us on the direction that she wishes to go.
All right. Well, I know we wanted to kind of talk about a reading I did with her. What was it, about 2 weeks ago now? It was a live reading, and I was very happy to know that I did really well on the reading and very proud of it. And so you wanted to kind of go through that a little bit?
Says then need to start talking about some of the anomalies and differences that I've also experienced with Tilly. So
Okay. Yeah, we can go with that. Go for it.
great. So if you could, I guess maybe you'd be probably as good a person as ever to go through what are the highlights, what are the main points of the reading? What did you notice just from afar, having this reading through the internet, basically, about Tilly?
I felt a lot of the spiritual love coming through her. She's just very filled with love and a lot of light energy that came through. I was saying, and to let everybody know, I did not have a picture of her or anything. So this was all just off of just um being a name. Okay. So I had like that she glows like a firefly, which was really different because I've never had anything like that come through for me. So that was really pretty cool. Um, I said that her
Could you say that one more time? Because there's a little bit of a lag. I think some of the message that you had, I'm not sure on my end, I couldn't hear it very well. So I'm not sure if your listeners are going to be able to hear it as well.
Okay. Um, I I got the wording of she glows like a firefly, which
Mhm.
that was really cool. I mean, for
Mhm.
me, it was something that's never been brought up for me before. So that was a very new and very like detailed thing that I got with it. Um, her wings are opening up and she's flying. She's just out and flying. Um, and I also got that she works very well with the galactic family. Uh, and that's her future's lightening up with new projects.
Mhm.
And I got that there's a male figure that was coming up with her, like a blue with dark eyes.
Mhm.
And I got it was a star-like planet. And I got that there's some speaking um telepathically with it.
Mhm. Mhm.
I also got that she was changing levels between, I was just guessing, like a 5D through to a 7D. So she was in the midst of changing into a newer, higher level of energy and or dimension. I also got the colors of purple, white, green aura with her. And I got a physical beauty that brings people to her. And that's something I don't typically get with anybody. I mean, the beauty that just comes through, it was just like, just beauty. I mean, you can't explain the beauty. It was just beautiful.
Sure.
Um, and I was picking up a boy and a girl, and so I wasn't quite sure where that was coming from. And I picked up a motherly person. Um, and I also got that she flies by the seat of her pants. So she's just like, doot, doot, and
Yeah.
goes about. So that was pretty much the reading that I got for her. And so, yeah, if you want to say anything more on that.
Yeah, definitely. So, in the very beginning, as you said, just this super light, happy, loving, bubbly, character that just seems to define her essence was something that I noticed right from the get-go myself. And unfortunately for me, I came with so much earthly baggage that the very first time that I met Tilly in person, we got along very, very well. Online, text messaging, we had a lot of things to talk about. But as is kind of typical for what happens when people actually physically become, in proximity to Tilly, I believe it's sort of a vibrational equation to where people will have a range of different, usually extreme responses to her. And my response at first, I think, unfortunately revealed where I was vibrationally at that point, which was kind of a jerk. We could just say kind of a jerk. And when I saw her come, bouncing out of her apartment for our first date, she looked so happy. And my first thought was, ugh, nobody can be that happy. And I mean, I didn't realize that that was the misery that I was living in because I was in such delusion that I was good with my life. I knew what I wanted. I knew what reality was. I was so set, one of these kind of
Right.
things that I had completely lost perspective. I was so, my head so far up my butt, you could say. And so that was my initial response to her, which I look back on it now, I feel so terrible about it, because she was so joyful, in that first meeting. And others, though, have had, again, a range of responses to her from, someone who, as you said, she just has this, beautiful energy that people are drawn to. I have watched complete strangers come up to her and say, can I either take a picture of you or with you? You're just so amazing. Or can I give you something? They have things that they just have with them that they say, I want to give this to you. And I've never, ever seen that really with anybody. I mean, I know some people talk about celebrities, maybe being worshipped or, things like of that nature, gods
Right.
or goddess statues, people laying things at their feet, but an actual person who to me seemed like just anybody else, was so strange to me. And not just, one occurrence, multiple occurrences over these 10 years. Some people who fixate, who obsess, usually men or males, where it's like nobody else exists but her, and their attention will get very, very intense. Even if I'm standing there saying, hello, hey, husband over
Yeah.
here, she's, off the table, bro. It's not a thing, it's like it not even there, So it very, very interesting to have that wide range of responses. So your reading in that way was very validating. That she does have that sort of just seemingly otherworldly energy that's just cranked all the way up. And again, I feel like it's a vibrational thing that depending on what vibration that individual is on, they will respond accordingly. And it kind of, I think it's telling of that particular individual's energy, what they're prone to, and about their character, really, how they respond to her. And not to say that they can't change that. I do believe people can change their vibrations and whatnot. It's almost like an immediate mirror. It's a reflection. She offers this reflection for people, whether or not they like it or they can see it. To me, on the outside now, having done a lot of this introspective work and, clearing my own baggage and attempting to raise my own vibration, I have more of this awareness now and this ability to see that. So the mention for you though of the from moving from 5D to 7D also made a lot of sense to me because she seems to now she's becoming more aware of how the average person works, and she is learning how to work with that. And whereas before, when we first met, she was very difficult for me to understand. She was very literal in her language. She was very pure in her, pure and stable in her mood states. They didn't fluctuate, based on whether or not she's had something to eat that day, or if something upset her earlier in the day, or she's got ruminating something in her mind about something that was said last week. She's not like that. She's very much a, stable, open book kind of, situation, whereas I was used to people manipulating me constantly, ulterior motives, or me trying to read how they were so that I wouldn't upset them, trigger them, cause some kind of conflict or problem, which again was how I grew up. It was not safe to share how I was really feeling, dealing with emotions like that. So you just, squash it down, a typical toxic masculinity, or so they say, which is
Yeah.
no good for anybody, I don't
Right.
think. So, she has gone from, unfortunately having to learn the hard way just how different she operates and thinks, and learning how to integrate with the average person. It's taken me darn near the better part of a decade to understand exactly how she thinks, how she operates, where she's coming from. And she's getting to that point now where I think that's where your 5D to 7D switchover is happening, is that she comes with what I think is knowledge of non-human psychology and integrating that with very human psychology, which is largely based on ego. And I don't
Right.
say that to be negative or disparaging. I mean it in the ego sense that it's the avatar, the character, the emotions, the feelings, the thoughts, the shame, the anger, the sadness, all of these things, all of these emotions that we personify and carry that, instead of being able to recognize the feeling from who we are. If that makes any sense. So,
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, it's part of the human nature to have that ego. And from my understandings, we have the ego for a purpose and
exactly.
we just kind of overdo it sometimes.
Sure. Yeah, it's it's
Yeah.
a it's a facet of us that I think we are just baby steps learning how to navigate and negotiate. I think
Yeah.
many animals in the animal kingdom, they lack that sort of emotional life. It's very simple for them. They're either, hungry, horny, sleepy, any any of those things. It's a pretty basic existence. And when they're in that, state of being, they're in that, and they move from one state to the next without, a ton of, carry through of anxiety or, resentment or depression or, any of these things that we create because we are more self-aware. More self-aware. I say that with a giant asterisk because I wonder some people how self-aware they are. We're all in different levels of that. I think no judgment there
Yeah.
whatsoever. I think it's just different, levels of growth, soul growth, really. So I think
Right.
humans, as in general, there's a tremendous range of people who are coming to awareness of those feelings, and then now gaining skills to navigate that in a healthy fashion. leveling up, if you will. So for maybe somebody like me going from the 3D to the 4D or 5D, maybe I'm behind Tilly, I think, in some ways, but it's to each his own journey. So
Yeah. And I'm on that journey now myself. I'm trying to figure out this balance between the ego and, you know, the spirit side to bring it together to where I'm more level.
sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a lot of yeah, you have a lot of plates spinning, a lot of balls in the air, juggling, because that's in some ways the life of an animal. Well, average animal is very simple. There's
Right.
not much thought. It's a program basically. They go through the motions because that's the instinct, and that's all there is to it. But we have another dimension, I guess, if you want to bring in multiple dimensions here. We have another dimension to consider, which is our awareness of mortality, and then all of the feelings that come along with that. If you want to talk about, I guess, some philosophical or psychological concepts for a minute. So yeah, so it's when you add that other aspect now,
Yeah.
for every facet that you add, it's not just, one jump, one level. It's magnified. It's multiple levels because within the quantum, every one facet that you add, it's in multiples, if that makes any sense. It's not just like going from 1 to 2, it's like going from 1 to 10. It gets infinitely more complex the higher up you go, because there are more dimensions to consider. So
Right. Right. Yeah. A lot of different levels to bring down to, or not necessarily bringing down, but leveling out to wherever you are. That's it's a lot.
sure, yeah, I think
Yeah.
we give ourselves some grace and some compassion for that. Not just because the ego needs it, but because it's baby learning to go from crawling to walking. That's big, and I think that's kind of an analogy where we're sort of at as a species, as humans. So
Yeah. I will agree with that. Definitely.
mhm. Yeah,
Yeah. So hopefully this podcast, Terry, will be bringing people up so we can all bring up the levels so we can level this out a little bit easier and help each other out.
exactly. Yep. And
Yeah.
that's kind of what we sort of aim to do together now, because I won't pretend it has been a very, very difficult journey for me, and really for Tilly in a lot of ways too, to come to the realization that people don't hold the same values or the same, thoughts or integrity in some ways, the same goals that she comes to every single relationship with. In fact, they're often the opposite. She's usually very cooperative and it likes to integrate with people. And while people might say that that's, they think that they're cooperative or that they want to be, there's a lot that they have yet to work through to actually make a truly trusting and intimate in a not in a romantic sense, but in a, I guess, in a cooperative sense, in a not sure exactly, in an intellectual sense, mental, emotional, all those different ways. There's a lot more
Yeah.
to it than just
Yeah.
romantic. But and so it was tough for her to come to that realization that she really, in some ways, feels quite alone. Um, and a lot of people didn't give her the same that she would give to every interaction that she had. It wasn't just romantic relationships, it was all types of interactions. She just wants to help, and
Yeah.
and wasn't that way. So that's kind of been her cross to bear, and mine has just been what I think is undoing what has been referred to as generational trauma. A lot of people over the, many, many years of human existence, or however many it's actually been, um,
Right.
learning how to go from an animal that's based on survival and reproduction and instinct in that way to an emotional, self-aware creature, that and to be more selfless than selfish, which self-care is not selfish. That's another note that, I also
Right.
had to learn, that's there's so many bits to it. But yeah,
Yeah.
and then integrating that together, just consistently miscommunicating and missing opportunities for building, trust and intimacy in that way, because we're not coming from the same world, essentially, not coming from the same set of beliefs or operating systems at all. So yeah, it's been a struggle, but what we do now is, with what we have learned together, where I've come from and where she has come from, mentally and emotionally, try to bridge that gap for people, because with her understanding of non-human psychology, it, I think, will allow for people to have less fear and anxiety regarding the paranormal, the, reality outside of what we think reality is, because that's kind of a go-to for humans in that primitive mind. They're going to go straight to, fear or anger, or, some kind of emotion like that, that has to do with, am I in danger? Do I need to fight, flight, or freeze, And trying to now take what I have learned to bring myself more towards that non-human psychology has helped me to feel much more at ease about paranormal experiences in general, and also to be very objective and respectful to what might be on the other side of the veil, because we have a hard enough time sometimes remembering our car keys in the morning, but there must be other beings who have much greater understanding of universal law and emotional intelligence, or even just integrity, just straight integrity, which is something that we sorely lack a lot of the time. Which I understand, I have compassion for. We have a lot that we're juggling, but it's still something that you wouldn't try to have a talk with a 6-year-old that was very deep. And that's kind of how I feel some of these non-human people might be facing when they're, trying to communicate with a human being. That human being might be absolutely terrified out of their mind, which might be why, the aliens and others don't really try to talk to us, because it's too difficult at the time. I don't blame them, So,
Oh, I don't either.
empathizing. Right, yeah. And being able to empathize with these other entities. And then also, having once been shown the power that these other entities may have, it's very worthy of respect. So it's humbling, and also, I think, an education that, when people are ready, is worth their time and attention to ease their high ego or high emotionality, anger and fear and anxiety, yeah, those sorts of things. So
Yeah. It's always timing. It's always the right time things will happen.
mm,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
definitely.
absolutely.
Definitely.
So yeah, you nailed it in your reading spectacularly, I think, in
Thank you.
noting just how different, she really is, and how different I've seen her to be amongst the average people. And I don't say that because I love her. Obviously, you're going to talk highly of the person that you're married, whether or not it's because you love them, or you just don't want to look bad. Either way, it's not. Um, it's not about that. It's genuine
Right.
objectivity that it's truly unique.
Well, thank you very much for that. I mean, that really means a lot to me. It really
Yeah,
does. And um, but I had help, as you know, we have help when we do our readings. It's not just me, it's spirit and the person that you're doing the reading for. It's part them too. So
yeah. Well,
oh,
and that's
thank you with
something.
everyone.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I think that's something that's very noteworthy too, worth talking about, is that, I think some of it is genetic, where, someone has a predisposition to a certain type of gift. So whether that be, extrasensory perception, or the ability to lucid dream, or astral project, or telepathy, any of those things, or commune with any entity on the other side of the veil. Some of that is genetic, but also, it's, again, I think, a frequency thing. When you are holding yourself at a certain frequency, it allows you to, like a radio, be able to tune in and actually receive these things that are, you know that there are radio waves around you all the time. You're not hearing them in your head, at least most people, I hope, are not hearing them in their head. That would be extremely distracting. But it's the same thing, I think, for those messages that source messages. We're all from, I think we're all from that source. But when someone is on a particular frequency, they're able to gain access to those. And I think some people can transcend their genetics a little bit. They can move the needle so that they can make themselves more open to certain types of extrasensory perceptions. Me, for example, I have absolutely had clairvoyant dreams. I have had dreams where I have been spoken to by what presented to me as an Egyptian god who had a message for Tilly. I only remember my dreams when there's something in there that is, I think, coming from source. The rest of it is just, the brain dumping whatever, the ego had hanging on for the day or your life that you have to deal with still.
So, real quick
And
question on that.
yeah.
So,
Hmm.
when you're dreaming like that,
Hmm.
because I have dreams that I don't really remember or whatnot,
Hmm.
and then there's other dreams that it's like detailed. So, is that kind of what that's happening? Is the ones you don't remember are the ones that's just monkey mind per se?
Yeah, monkey mind or the mind taking out the trash, as I say. That's my personal theory that, because
Okay.
those dreams that, taking out the trash dreams, basically, I will remember them for the first couple of minutes after I wake up, but you talk to me by the time I've, gone to the bathroom in the morning and they're gone. And so those I think is the mind just, doing the sweep. But the ones that you remember, I think are coming from, their download of some kind. So, but that's just my personal theory. And if you have had those dreams where you remember them, you might have noted that they might have had some, pertinence to your real life, or I should say real life, your conscious life in this
Yeah, there
reality.
you
So,
go.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, some of them I have real details of. And what do you think about repeating dreams?
So the repeating dreams, now those ones, if you do recall them and they repeat, if you go by some of the psychologists like, Freud or Jung, they will say, and I tend to believe that those are things that you're ruminating on, that psychologically, because of the ego, because of that um, mind that wants to hang on to emotions rather than just let them pass through you and, process them. There's a very good book, if anybody's interested in reading, called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers by Robert Sapolsky, that talks about, that life of animals who can go from, like this is a funny analogy I like to give, the dog or cat, they'll be sitting there retching in the corner and they'll puke. And then literally 2 minutes later, they're bouncing around the room like they're having a grand old time. Nothing happened. Whereas if one of us were puking, we'd be like, oh my God, my whole day is over.
Yeah.
Like we ruminate on it, or some people, they're terrified to puke because they just hate puking so much. But the animals are like, nope, this is something I got to do. We're going to do it and we're going to move on. So that book actually talks about how humans are kind of unique in that way where we hang on to these things. And so I think that's what repeating dreams are, is that there's something that someone's hanging on to that desperately needs some kind of processing, which, emotional regulation skills and, any kind of mental health skills, processing of trauma or, injuries in that way to your emotional self, your physical self, that's what those repeating dreams are trying to tell you. Because so many people I know have had the same dream that I've had, which is you're back in high school, you forgot the combination to your locker, and you're late for class, and those things like those are our formative years. So that is absolutely a traumatic experience. But I think in just going through the steps to acknowledge it, to say, those days are over. Why was I nervous? I was nervous because there'd be consequence. What would happen if, I went back to that time and the teacher, instead of punishing me, said, "Hey, I understand, stuff happens, and it'll be okay." Sometimes if you go through that type of processing, that alternative scenario where instead of being abused or punished for an honest mistake, you were supported, which here we're talking about mechanisms of generational trauma over and over again, that if you go through and just take the time to dissect it a little bit in ways that basic cognitive behavioral therapy would do, which now on YouTube, as far as I'm concerned, there's no excuse for anybody. They can go and, learn a little bit about it and start to try to work that back. It's been an awful long time since I've had a dream like that because I did that. So, and these are the kinds of things that help lift people's vibration, I think, lift their frequency because they're clearing what I would consider emotional baggage that they just don't need anymore. It was important at the time to them, but they didn't get the help they needed to process it. And it's never too late to do it. So,
Wow. Wow. Yeah, I had one when I was around crazy enough, like 6 years old. That seems to be my big year. A lot of things happening to me at that year. But it was
so
around
you're
that.
out again one more time. You might have to repeat it. Years old, you had a dream.
Okay. I had a
Try
repeating dream.
repeating it one more time.
I had a
Yeah.
dream when I was 6 years old, around 6 years old, that was repeated. I think I had it like the
Mhm.
full week, and I still remember it like I just had it. It's so that's something that needs to be worked through still, if I could still remember it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I
Okay.
mean, certainly at your pace, there are different types of therapy that, not every therapist will say that it's worth going back and reliving the trauma, for in some instances that's a no-no, you don't do that to fix it. You don't always have to do that. But for certain types, it's good to just, once you've learned those good emotional regulation skills and you learned what would have been a healthier, more supportive way to handle that situation, you can, as they say, go back and reparent that younger version of yourself and reintegrate that piece. At least for me, it does work, and it's worth doing, and people can do it. It's there's a sense sometimes I think people are afraid to do it, especially when they don't understand it, like the paranormal, and they don't
Yeah.
have the right skills, to
Yeah.
do that. They're not empowered to do it. Um, but that's what we're here for. That's what your podcast is here for, to help people, understand how to do that, not be afraid of it, know that they can, and clear up those things so that you have it, to speak in computer terms, you have more bandwidth, you have more energy, because when you're dealing with, this stuff, when you're preoccupying your brain with all of that, old trauma, it will exhaust you. It's sitting there under the surface. It's like, carrying a wet wool coat and you don't maybe realize that you're doing it. But there are subtle
Yeah.
signs if you're paying attention. So
Yeah. Yeah. That's wonderful. I mean, that's a good way of saying it, with a heavy coat and, because we all have the baggage.
mm,
And
yeah.
I mean, I'm not even sure how high up of an energy level we would have to be to not have baggage, because I think there's probably baggage no matter what dimension we're in. There's always
From
going
what
to
I
be baggage,
understand,
right?
very nearly, yeah. There at nearly every level, you would have to be what I think would be considered like above the 5D, and maybe what some people might call gods and goddesses, and higher, than that. Or maybe just, pure source. Certainly is unencumbered in that way.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
but as you said, I believe, maybe like you, that we have come here for this experience, to have these different constraints to then work through and experience. There's a philosopher by the name of Alan Watts that I resonate so much with his messages, and as a spirituality that I have adopted from him, my own type of spirituality, is that he was speaking about God. If we are all, and God is a word that so many, it comes loaded with so many ego based definitions and feelings about it. I should say source. If you were pure positive, or I shouldn't say positive, pure source energy, period, just the essence. And you could do anything you wanted, anytime you wanted. You had ultimate control over everything for infinity. In order to change that, in order to perhaps ascend even more and obtain even more experiences, you would have to take a piece of your essence and put it in a situation that you didn't have control over, which would then be something like Earth. There's a lot of things that we don't have control over, and that's for a very specific reason. A lot of people will spend a lot of energy trying to control things, and that's their journey to figure out that that's not necessarily the best way to go, or maybe for them it is, but that it's just one option. But there are a set of parameters that we've been given that are outside of our control. It's a brief moment in space and time. It doesn't last forever like
Right.
the infinite does. There's a
Right.
definitive, and no suffering lasts, forever, just like no good feeling lasts forever. It's their states of being that, you weave in and out of infinitely, in my opinion. So, to think that this life is, essentially we're a piece of God and it's a dream, that we're meant to frolic about and experience. There will be good, quote unquote. There will be bad, quote unquote. There will be absolute joy and elation, and there will be horrible suffering. And that's all part of the equation. It's all part of it. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I agree with that. I mean, I think us in the lower dimensions are having a tough time with it. But I mean, like you say, it's our learning. This is our classroom. This is where we're supposed to be trying to figure this stuff out in those baby steps. Yeah.
yeah, yep,
Yeah.
absolutely. And humility and empathy and compassion for for that is, I think, going to go a long way to helping. It's just one of those. Oh, it's one of those tools in the box that I think we need.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. So, can you talk about some of the paranormal experiences you've had?
Absolutely. So to harken back to earlier in the discussion when I mentioned an experience that I had that proved to me that I was not the tough guy on the block and that there were things that I did not have under control at all. Um, it a lot of these experiences happen to me when I'm in a sort of twilight, so not completely asleep, but not completely awake. That liminal space, I guess you could say, that happens. And I remember, I remember this. I will probably remember this vividly for the rest of my life. I was in this twilight space, sitting up in bed and doing something, reading or typing. I can't remember, sitting in bed, staring ahead. And off to my left, there was a small mirror on the wall, which in my waking reality didn't exist. So this mirror, I don't know, maybe yay big, not very big. I noticed as I'm staring ahead, out of my periphery, something in the mirror moves. But because I'm staring straight ahead, I know that there is nothing in front of the mirror. So immediately I'm a little like I actually have goosebumps a little bit just thinking about it because like this is that animal brain in there that goes, oh, something spooky, and you get a little
Yeah.
afraid. Um,
Right.
Something in the mirror moves. And so I go, I should look. And I turn to look, and coming head first out of the mirror is some very large, like shadow, dark entity. And it got its head all the way through the mirror, which took a fraction of a second. And I had no control over the immediate visceral scream that just came out of my mouth. I felt instant terror. Like, and nothing really makes me afraid. I'm generally, snakes, spiders, the dark, like I don't care, whatever. The biggest thing for me is like if I were stranded in the ocean at night, I might just die. But, outside of that, I'm okay. But this
Yeah.
was like when the doctor hits your knee and gives that like immediate knee jerk response. This thing coming through the mirror caused me to scream and to feel a sense of terror that I have never felt in my life. It tripped
Mm.
something so primal in me that it must have made me feel like I was going to die. And I'm also not a screamer. Like when I get startled, doesn't happen. Like I will keep it in, very contained. But this thing not only triggered like an emotional terror, but also an actual auditory scream from me. And because I had had some experience with lucid dreaming, I know how to wake myself up from a dream when I want to. So I had the presence of mind at that point to do that. And all I have to do is just close my eyes in the dream, which is kind of scary because when there's something going on around you that you don't like, when you close your eyes, you make yourself completely vulnerable to that.
Yeah.
Um, but I guess that's my version, my response. It's instead of fight or flight, it's just freeze and completely shut down, like turtle in its shell kind of thing, which works for me. And I came out of it. I woke up from it. I look over, obviously, there's no mirror on the wall. And Tilly is sound asleep next to me. Like there is, she didn't hear me scream. There wasn't anything like that. This was all happening in some other dimension that, existed. But I very, very
Wow.
viscerally felt this. And I woke her up, I was like, hey, you might want to know about this. And she was shocked because recently to that, just before that, she had been talking about entities that can cause this sort of response within people and with one of her close friends and didn't realize that this was unwanted by that particular entity. That it was disrespectful, essentially, to be doing that. And
Oh,
so
wow.
she had a discussion with this entity. She called this entity forth at some other point to say, "Hey, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to step on your toes. This was completely accidental. Any way that we can make a deal, and we'll stick with it. Have some integrity, rules, that you have for this sort of engagement, because that's a part of the non-human psychology is that it's very cut and dry. You say it's XYZ, it will stay XYZ until another conversation happens and another agreement is made that's amenable to both parties. There is no manipulation or deviation on either side because there's just an integrity and a respect that exists without ego involved. It's a, give and take transaction that's perfectly even, which is not at all how humans work, but
No.
uh, right. Yeah, so that's a whole other story. So once she made this contact and had this discussion with this entity, I've not had any issue with it since. And so, yeah, that's basically it. Outside of the three rules, which I don't know that I can discuss, but yeah, so that's it really, and that's part of teaching, I guess, people that integrity is important and not just respect in name, but respect in action. What that other individual is going to also agree is respectful, not just what our idea of it is. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Good lesson to learn.
mhm.
Yeah. I agree with that. I agree with that. Um, we mentioned or we talked about some paranormal stuff that when you stopped and you were smelling the roses. So remember that story that we were talking about where you had to stop and smell the roses and um
I'm not recalling it, but my memory is also
okay.
it's pretty rough sometimes.
It's okay. Um it was a walking through to the good and then you would have to stop and smell the roses to just relax. No.
Yeah, it's not ringing any bells. I'm so
Okay.
sorry.
No,
Yeah.
no, no, you're good. You're good. My notes sometimes aren't all the greatest either. So, yeah,
Yeah.
no problem.
But that's, I
Um,
mean, still a lovely message for people to, there's a reason that that exists, stop and smell the roses, because sometimes we can get so bogged down inside ourselves that we forget to open ourselves up to what's around us, get out of our head and enjoy some of these things that, though simple, some might say, really do make a difference for our mental, emotional, and physiological health. So I know I've needed to learn to do that periodically. I'm very, very, very goal-driven person, and some would say a perfectionist in some ways. And so it's I sometimes have to pull back on that, and as you said, stop and smell the roses. But now I wish that I knew what that was all about.
no,
Anyway,
that's
yeah.
okay. I'm sure it'll come about and excuse me. It's said for a reason, so it all works
Yeah,
out.
sure.
Um, you had a story of when you had stopped a car and you were driving with your mouth wide open.
Yeah.
Is that one? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, that's one thing that can happen when you become more aware of your environment and surroundings, instead of just constantly focusing on, what you're doing, go straight ahead sort of thing, is that there are some events that you might catch that are unusual to say the least. So Chili and I were running errands one day, sitting at a traffic light, and, cars turning directly in front of us, and we're just looking, looking around, and a car that was turning in front of us had an individual that had the not only the strangest expression I have ever seen, like so much so that it almost looked impossible to actually perform, but the proportions of this individual's head and face were not what you would expect for a human being. He was driving, and imagine our steering wheel's here, and he had his face pulled all the way past the steering wheel, and his mouth was like completely agape, and it looked like maybe he was looking up at the sky, but I mean, we looked, we couldn't see anything up there, but he had just the strangest proportions, a giant head, like not anything that you'd ever expect, and this absolutely like Elvis style coif that he had going on, but it was almost like he tried to do the Elvis look, but added way more hairspray than his toupee could possibly handle because it was way up here. And just like I said, the expression, the proportions of his face, the look that he was making, like when I say the look, it was almost like the scream mask. Like you're like, I don't think that people's jaws can articulate like that. And I just remember like looking as he went by, and I looked at her, I said, do you see that? And she didn't see it. And what's crazy is that sometimes when these things happen, you try to catch it on film, and mysteriously you can't catch it on film. We had a dash cam, and I said, oh, I got it. I have it on the dash cam. This is totally, I can show you. And wouldn't you know it, the sun was at a perfect angle that it literally blacked out his entire face and put it in shadow. I was like, you cannot be serious. But this is the sort of thing that happens with the paranormal. Sometimes people say, I saw this thing and I had the camera and it didn't work out. I have this experience now where I can say, I promise you, this what appeared to me to be a non-human entity who was trying so hard to fit that human skin suit, like, Men in Black sort of situation. I was like, you, sir, you need a little more help with that. Like, this isn't, you're not blending in very well. You're not convincing me anyway. But, and of course, I know there are what we would consider to be the average human who have proportions that are just different. But I wonder, are those non-human entities, I think that sometimes Hollywood stories like Men in Black, movies and books, there's lightweight disclosure going on all the time. Um, and or we're creating this reality that we're seeing, simply by calling it forth, speaking it into existence. People have way more control over their reality and their vibration than they think they do. There's this sort of learned helplessness that I think that they have because they don't understand the skills and their part in this quantum space, in this reality, and they're learning how to do that. But that again, with these sorts of disclosures that I think we're getting, um, it's there. It's there for anybody who's looking past the end of their nose. And Tilly she actually wrote a piece in this book, Weird Time, where she talks about some of these things for any of your listeners that might be interested in it, put out by Tim Schwartz and Sean Castile. It talks specifically actually about the Men in Black thing that I just mentioned, for anybody who's interested more on that. But yeah.
Yeah, I've always wondered about movies that come out like the Jetsons. I don't know.
Mm,
You seem pretty young to know about the Jetsons, but the show The Jetsons.
a little familiar with it, yeah.
Yeah, that one there, I mean, that came out what in the 70s or something like that, early
I think
70s,
so.
late
Yeah.
60s or something.
Mhm.
But and that's talking about your car being folded up into a suitcase and things like that. Even back then, to me, I feel like a lot of these movies like that have been like downloads or something. And like you're saying, to expose of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I don't think it's a simple genetic mutation that allows an exceptional human being to excel in any particular area. So, Einstein or Newton or Galileo, I'm pulling scientists because those are the first ones that come to mind. Alan Turing, the guy who did all of that coding during the World War. Brilliant minds, that seem to conceptualize ideas that are out of reach for most people. Um, I think it's perhaps again a little bit of genetic, but also that genetic difference allows them to tune into these downloads. Like anybody who does tarot reading or speaks with interdimensional beings or anything of that nature, or can see interdimensional beings. It's all yeah. I mean, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Wow. Is there anything else you would like to say since our time is kind of running low here? So,
Yeah, it
anything
goes
else you'd like to
fast.
say? Yeah, it does.
Uh,
It goes really fast.
Yeah, no, I think we covered a pretty awesome amount of material that I hope your listeners will find very, very helpful and encouraging, yeah, on the topic. But yeah, I'm happy with it if you are.
I am. I am happy. So, we'll just close it up at this point then. And I want to thank you again for being on the show. It's been such a pleasure to get to know you guys more. And oh, I hope to have you back on the show if you guys are up for it. So it'll
Absolutely.
be
The feeling's
fun.
mutual. We'd love to come on. And Tilly will probably join me next time for a little bit more, adding another dimension to the story. So
That would be awesome. I would love that. I would love that. All right. If anybody else out there has a story that you would like to share with us, email me at lighttalk423 at gmail.com and we will get you on the show or talk about it. And don't forget to click on the like, share, and subscribe buttons down below and check out my website at www.lighttalkwithdana.com. And we will see you all later. Thank you. Bye.